Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, the Maritime Museum, Vincent. Welcome.
Not quite sure what the...
Good morning. My thanks for this opportunity to speak about our museum. Hui Te Ananui a Tangaroa, the New Zealand Maritime Museum, is a nationally and internationally significant cultural heritage facility located in the Viaduct Harbour Precinct. We are kaitiaki of Taonga that tell the stories of Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and Aotearoa New Zealand's maritime heritage. We connect Aucklanders with their past to better appreciate and inform their present and future. Our museum provides a portal for visitors, both local and international, to explore the cultural identity of our city and our nation, and to engage with the stories of our relationship with the sea. It's our mission to collect, preserve, and interpret Aotearoa New Zealand's unique maritime stories through the hard work of our staff and more than 150 volunteers who help us develop and deliver our galleries, the Little Laxon Maritime Library, 4 working heritage vessels, engaging public programming, and quality education programs that ensure Aucklanders have access to our collection of taonga, as well as providing a major tourist attraction for the visitors of Auckland. Before I go any further, I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank and pay tribute to our volunteers. They're a huge, dedicated and remarkable resource, and we're very grateful to them for their hard work and passion. In the last financial year, the New Zealand Maritime Museum benefited from over 45,000 hours of volunteer labour. Our volunteers assist us as guides, hosts, collection assistants, shipwrights, model makers, and masters and crews of our vessels. Obviously, it's this remarkable community resource that allows the museum to function at the level that it does. On a purely practical level, our volunteers are the backbone of our efforts to run our institution sustainably, as without them much of this work would have to be abandoned or heavily scaled back due to the large staff costs that would be involved. But our volunteers are much more than just the hours they provide. They are a direct link to the wider Auckland community and represent a broad mix of backgrounds and ages, the oldest being 89 and the youngest having just finished school. The real heart of the museum is, of course, our collection. While unified by a maritime theme, our collections are incredibly broad and encompass everything from the archives of the Auckland Harbour Board to the Muaroa Protest Collection, ranging from dry as dust records to vibrant art. We conserve and make available to the people of Auckland vessels as diverse as Polynesian voyaging waka, 19th century coastal traders, the engineering brilliance of modern racing yachts, to Nautilus, a World War I motor launch that ferried wounded to the hospital ship Marima. These collections are not only available in the museum galleries, but increasingly online and uniquely on water, with the New Zealand Maritime Museum offering the only regular heritage sailing experience in the city, which an Aucklander can access for less than the cost of a ticket to Waiheke. The museum's collection has suffered somewhat in the past from a dearth of proper processing and management, largely due to the large scale of the collection and the inbuilt capacity of the size of our collections team. I'm pleased to report that the museum has turned this trend around in recent years through the ongoing support of the Amenities Funding Board and a fresh focus within our collections team. We've increased our active processing of our collection by nearly 400% over the last 2 years. While this may sound esoteric, sound records are the heart of good collection management and the bedrock of both the maintenance of our collection for future generations and ensuring access for visitors today. The breadth of our collection and the many ways it intersects with the lives of the people of this city and further afield is perhaps best seen in the various ways we interpret and present this collection and our maritime stories to the public. Last year I reported on a new philosophy of collaboration toward which we were working and which has informed our activity over the last year. While this has had many positive outcomes, we are perhaps proudest of our now formalised relationship with the Te Toki Voyaging Trust. The MOU between our two organisations have seen the 2 Wakahuroa, Haunui and Aotearoa 1 gain permanent homes in the museum marina. This partnership with Te Toki has enabled the museum to begin to engage our visitors in the unique story of the Great Pacific Migration and the arrival of first waka to the shores of Aotearoa. While this has always been a story the museum has told somewhat through its galleries, we now have the ability to work with Te Toki to explore this story with our visitors via an active engagement. We have, as a first step, begun offering formal education programs to schools aboard the waka. These have not only been sold out, but we now have a large waiting list. And later this year, we'll begin a 3-month trial of public sailings on the Waitemata, with the museum and Te Toki volunteers working together to sail the vessels. We have also continued with our collaborative program of exhibitions. At the Beach, 100 Years of Summer Fashion in New Zealand was developed in partnership with the New Zealand Fashion Museum. Not only was this one of our most successful exhibitions ever, but it's attracted a new audience to the museum. Also of note in the last year were the joint exhibitions Travuni, Beyond the Horizon, and Ka o te wai, Ko te wai, Ka o, I am the water is me. These exhibitions, respectively created by Emma and Kaliopate Tavola and the Roots Collective, allowed our visitors a significant experience around connections between distant homelands and those who now live in New Zealand, and the important story of how pollution in our oceans, especially the Pacific, affects us and what we can do about it. These exhibitions also added to the collection of the museum in the long term, with artworks from the Roots Collective fashioned from cleaned up rubbish from Okahu Bay, and a map woven by all the current residents of Travuni in Fiji being gifted to the museum after the close of the exhibitions. Visiting schools remain one of our most important audiences, and this year has seen us develop a successful pilot program with the Four Winds Foundation, enabling students from South Auckland who might otherwise find the museum inaccessible to visit us. This program, begun as a trial over one term, was heavily oversubscribed and extended over the remainder of last year, with discussion continuing about this in this year, and enabled free transport, visitation and access to the museum program. Continuing on the theme of accessibility, our education team have for the first time developed programs and resource for low vision students in collaboration with the low vision community around these maritime stories. Despite all the positive news, it would be remiss of me not to remark that the museum of course faces challenges. Like all community, heritage and charitable organisations, we must steer the course between fiscal prudence, professionalism and remaining accessible and comfortable community spaces. The museum also has what I generally refer to as legacy issues, large matters that can affect the viability of the museum in the long term, while not necessarily affecting the museum's operation on a day-to-day basis. Some of these date back to the arrangements in the foundation of the museum in the early 1990s, and most particularly at the present, our concern is in the terms of our lease and our tenure on Hobson Wharf, which currently expires in 2027. This also affects our ability to attract capital funding, and therefore to be able to improve our galleries and bring the manner in which we present our stories and preserve our collection to a best practice manner. I mention these matters not to undercut the very real success of the museum, but to underscore that the museum's executive and governance teams are fully aware of the issues that that face our institution and are working proactively with our partners and stakeholders, especially city bodies such as Panuku Development Auckland, RFA and the council itself, to mitigate and resolve these matters in a way that will provide maximum benefit to Auckland and its residents. It is genuinely a real pleasure to be able to report to you on what I consider an incredibly successful and vibrant period for the New Zealand Maritime Museum. The success is evident not only in the projects that I have described, but in our numbers. Building on the increased visitation of last year, the New Zealand Maritime Museum has hit a record high in its existence, with over 150,000 visits to the museum for the first time in our history. Importantly, over 20,000 of these visitors were children who came to the museum for a learning experience with museum staff, and in many cases for the first time on the water on the Waitemata and one of our heritage vessels, and nearly 60% of these visitors were Aucklanders. We have scored well qualitatively also, with the Museum's Aotearoa National Visitor Survey showing 93% of our visitors either satisfied or very satisfied with their visit. Our popularity with visitors to Auckland has also increased, with our TripAdvisor ranking jumping from 19th to 15th out of 200 attractions, just one spot away from Waiheke Island. Financially, the museum is also in good condition currently, staying within or below budget. We are also extremely conscious of the need to remain sustainable financially, and we raise approximately 60% of our annual operating budget through our commercial activity and gate revenue. On the whole, I believe that New Zealand Maritime Museum is an asset to Auckland and the people of New Zealand, and we are proud of the improving results on which the museum is able to report and the greater level of public engagement which these represent. The importance of maritime heritage to our city and our country as a whole cannot be overstated, and I would like to extend the gratitude of the staff and Trust Board of the New Zealand Maritime Museum to the Amenities Funding Board, Auckland Council, and particularly the residents of the city for their continuing support that allows us to tell these important New Zealand stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. I was at a function, the opening of your recent exhibition the other day, and your commentator made Hardy Williams made the point that the collection seemed quite weak in Maori boats and navigation stories, etc.
Yes, we are not particularly strong in that area. I think we are quite strong in the stories, but not in the collection. We're a relatively young museum, and we were set up with a variety of sources from our collection, some coming on loan from Auckland Museum, which is an existing relationship that we value very highly, and since then has been sort of compiled by very modest purchases by the museum and also through gifting. This particular area that you've raised, particularly Maori vessels, crafts of various types, are not ones that are regularly on the market, and if they are, sometimes they're ones we cannot afford. The majority of the museum collection that is specific to that sort of area is actually the lion's share of our loan from Auckland Museum, which is one of our foundational loans. There are other ways, of course, to engage with these stories around when we look at gallery redevelopment. You don't necessarily need the collection item to tell the stories, but all of those kind of things cost large quantities of money when you come talking about gallery renewal. So they're somewhat on hold until we can sort out our lease and tenure issues and whether we know we're redeveloping the site we're on currently. So we're exploring other ways of doing that, like, as I've mentioned, through our relationship with the Toki Voyaging Trust and increased engagement. We've recently had some conversations with Ngāti Whātua about their Waka Ama collection and being able to host more things like that. Involvement in the Waka Festival annually now as well, since that started up. So we look at alternate ways of telling those stories as opposed to through our collections. But long term, it would be an area we'd love to grow.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, and thanks for being here and your presentation. And I heard you say that 150,000 visitors, and 120 of those were...
So 150,000 visitors and around 20,000 are school children.
20,000 through school programs. Considering the footprint that you occupy, really smack bang in the middle of our waterfront, where there's a significant and increasing number of foot traffic. 150,000 to me sounds like a very low number considering your location and the proximity to the city centre, the Wynyard Quarter and all the activity that we've built successfully around you. And I'm aware that your lease is 2022? 27. So that's 10 years away. Is your board looking seriously at a whole new maritime museum as opposed to just tweaking what's there? Because, getting to the question, Mr. Chair, for some years I've seen the issues at the Maritime Museum, but I haven't really seen a total redirection in the Maritime Museum.
Well, first of all, on the point you make on our numbers, I completely agree. I'd be much more comfortable with the museum sitting at around 250,000 visitors a year. I think that's about as many as we can handle in our building. We have, over the last 2 years, seen a 17 and then a 29% increase in our visitation over the last 2 years, as has been reported in our annual report. So we've seen a really big jump over the last 2 years. I put this down to a variety of factors. One of them is, as you pointed out, we're in a much busier area than we have been previously, where the museum was set up originally. The reason we got that wharf is nobody wanted it. Since the redevelopment in that area, of course, it's a much more foot traffic area. So those big jumps in numbers have resulted in a complete change in the way we approach our programs, our exhibitions, the way we engage with our public. We've completely changed the way that we, for example, advertise the museum's presence. We've moved to a much more online basis. Prior to my arrival and shortly after, the museum was advertising in a very traditional manner, which wasn't really reaching a lot of people. I completely agree, as does our board, that we are well overdue for research, for a change of how we sort of present the whole maritime story throughout our galleries and the way we manage things. We're doing that currently in our public programming. I like to think that's reflected in our numbers. The way, back in 2009, our trust board presented a master plan around redevelopment of our galleries and sort of bringing them up to best practice, changing them from, because a lot of them date back basically to the 1993 when the museum opened. But of course there was a very large price tag attached to that in the multiple tens of millions of dollars, and it, at that time, did not get any further. We still would like to do that, but at the moment we are focusing on sort of seeing what the best benefit can be with our site. With our preference is to stay where we are, but we don't want to look at spending a large amount of money on a site that we might not be in less than 10 years. The other aspect, of course, to that is having a short lease means it's very hard for us to attract capital funding, which would allow us to redevelop those galleries in ways that are more in line with current scholarship and museology.
Thank you. Just one short question. I note that one of the least visited parts of your museum is the Pete Bosley designed, is that KZ7, isn't it?
No, that's Black Magic.
That's Black Magic.
Yeah.
That's one of the least.
Blue Water Black Magic
and
is the
at
gallery.
your front door you have KZ1 from 1988, which you can just see the rudder and underside of. It's been there for a long time and it occupies a lot of space. And there's been some reference to the Eurocentric focus of the museum. Is there any plan to remove that second place getter?
Well, our trust board and our staff will be quite open to that, but of course it is a collection item, so we can't just get rid of it, as it were. It has to be, disposed of in an appropriate manner or placed in a new location. And we have had conversations with Panuku, Violet Harbour Holdings, various people about alternate locations. What they often come down to is the desire for the alternate location tends to move it a long way away from the Maritime Museum, which we're not necessarily against, but we are against is retaining it as part of our collection and retaining responsibility for it when it's nowhere near our entry. The museum, speaking of that sort of entry and the travelling through the museum, I don't disagree as well that we are quite difficult when it comes to wayfinding. The museum some years ago, for fiscal reasons, and I think they were probably the right decisions, gave up the entire Launchments building to commercial activity. And that was the prior entry to the museum. It made much more sense of the building than the quite small entry we have at the moment. And we're looking at ways that we can redevelop that. I should mention as well that when you enter the museum, the first two sort of things that you come across, the first is the Pacific Discovery Theatre, which is a film-based presentation entirely about the Great Pacific Migration. And the first gallery after that has collection items is the Hawaii Gallery, which is probably the largest gallery in the museum, with the exception of the combined Hall of Yachting and Blue Water Black Magic, which was the 2008 extension, and that's the current home of our Pacific collection. What I would like to see long term is a more integrated approach across all the galleries. At the moment it's quite old fashioned, as I've mentioned. It's very ghettoised, and I'd like to see it a lot more integrated. So navigation should be something we should be able to talk throughout the galleries, and the greatest navigation story on the planet is the migration across the Pacific, culminating in the arrival in Aotearoa. So I don't disagree with any of your points at all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. Right, Glenn, Councillor Member Wilcox.
Yeah. So I'm surprised to hear that you've got a dearth of Māori kaupapa, when in 2014 I actually rang your museum twice and received no reply when we were looking for a place to store our waka and to have our waka. So I'm just a little bit amazed that that's happened. Are you talking to any mana whenua?
Well, what was the second part of the question?
Are you talking to mana whenua?
Yes, so we have. The museum's not had a terribly good track record in this area. I can't speak to 2014, it's before I came along. I can certainly guarantee that if that kind of approach happened today, there'd be a much more robust manner in which it was dealt with. Our trust board is currently reviewing its trust deed, which is, I think, the main cause of this lack of conversation, because at the moment it's very old-fashioned. It dates from 1981, and we are looking at ways that we can fully integrate the treaty and Māori representation on our trust board. All the internal work around that has been done. It is slightly on pause at the moment because we are looking at a variety of different governance models in the way that we work forward, and we've been advised that changing our trust deed at the moment wouldn't be the best way of dealing with that. However, so instead we're dealing with it on a staff level, and it's sort of in two ways. The first sort of level is in our engagement with Tekanga. So we are fortunate in the friendship and services of Harry Williams, who is sort of basically engaging with our staff and teaching them ways that we can integrate our Tekanga into our day-to-day practices, and that's also having great dividends in our education program. The other part is our partnerships that we're having increasingly with Ngāti Whātua and Te Turkey Voyaging Trust are the two places we've started. As I said, it's not something the museum's done particularly well in the past, so we've started relatively small and trying to get some good programs up and running where we have a high level of representation and are engaging with those stories more fully.
Thank you.
Councillor Halls.
Thank you. Mr Chair, I think might be a question to your good self. Just thinking about the process that I might just wait while you...
Sorry.
That's okay. I didn't want to embarrass you. It's kind of a question for you around the process, and so it's not particular to the Maritime Museum. My understanding of this item is we're going through our Arafa family. We're hearing a bit of a report on each member of the family and having a think about the very moderate request here for funding. We are, however, also in item 21 going to deal with the very, very good report on our major cultural and heritage institutions. So my sense is that that's probably a useful place for some of the more searching and future questions. I'm just asking, would that be useful?
Yes, it would be.
Would that? That's good. Thank you.
So, thank you, Vincent.
Thank you very much.
We'll move, Councillor Holst will move a vote of thanks. We'll do it at the end as well, so we'll do that at the end.